Well, let's talk. I'd love to say we've got great news, but the last few weeks have been up and down. It has been a roller coaster. Lots of fun. We're going to get to the politics in a minute, but first, I've got to unload. This is going to be kind of a semi-rant, but you're aware of my relationship with my family, and it has got worse. Back in '97, when the daughter was born, my father set up a college saving fund for her in the state of Florida. Initially, he tossed $10,000 into the pot, and other amounts have been dropped in from time to time, so that this past year there should have been enough money in that account for 2 or 3 years worth of schooling at the school of her choice. Originally, the program was set up in Florida to provide for any Florida student who wanted an education in the state of Florida. They could choose whatever college they wanted to in the state of Florida. But at some point, the state of Florida divested itself of this program, and it got transferred to a firm that is headquartered in West Virginia. The last 3 weeks, the daughter has been trying long desperately to get hold of her account. At some point, my brother was supposed to have signed all of the necessary paperwork to transfer ownership of the money from him to her. This was weird doings. My father set it up. Then when he died, for some reason, ownership of the account passed to my brother rather than to me. Why they did that, I have no idea, but my brother had control of the account. And we had to jump through flaming hoops to get that transferred because my brother is non-compos mentis. He's got dementia and Alzheimer's and all sorts of stuff and is barely aware that he is. But at some point, somebody sucked all the money out of that account. The daughter found out today there is nothing in that account. So, all the available evidence points to my brother having emptied that account into his own. That means at this point that my family has abused me in body, mind, and estate in every way that is possible. And I'm having troubles getting over that. But all it means is I'm just going to have to foot the daughter's education bill as best I can, one course at a time. But at least she has finally decided on a major, forensic psychology, and she has got her choices down to 2 or 3 colleges that are pretty good, both, on campus and online. So we're going to work this as best we can. It's going to be difficult because my 401 plan took a big beating over the last couple of years. And what I will be drawing out of that account has gone down from $4,000 a month to just barely $1,200 a month. So this means that I am just going to have to continue to be working until the day I drop down, or, I'm so old and dumb that I can no longer do any of the work. We'll just have to see. But on the good news front, we have some nice stuff going on. The last of our bulbs has finally bloomed. We are up to our hawks in gladiolas, red and purple and all sorts of colors. We had designed the garden so that there would be bulbs blooming from April through August, and the gladiolas are the last of the year. When they are finished and we get into October, we're going to have to dig up all the bulbs and replant them, rearrange the garden somewhat because it just looks kind of chaotic right now. And for some reason that I still don't understand, something goes on with the soil around here. During the off season, when the bulbs are just there, they're floating up to the top of the soil. I don't know how that happens, but it does. So we have to keep replanting, and yeah, that's why the garden's rather chaotic, but we'll take care of it. Which brings me to the weather report. As you may be aware, we went through a month of record high temperatures. Most of the time it was way too hot for me to get outside and work. Can't get outside and work because of heat injuries. I may have told you while in the Army, I got 2 heat strokes in the last few years during field training exercises, hospitalized in an ice bath and all that stuff. So I have to be very careful about being outside in the heat. The GP told me that when the temperature is above 90, I should not be outside at all. So during the summer, I turn into a vampire. I'm awake mostly at night and, fly around and suck blood. But at any rate, we have plans for the garden, and we'll see where that goes. And digging and replanting and planting and replanting and buying more bulbs every year. Eventually, we will have this thing the way we want it to be. But as I've said before, gardens take years and years to develop into what you want them to be, and it's a project of care, patience, and love. Speaking of care, patience, and love, as you know, I've been on the hunt for a motorcycle for quite some time. That has had its ups and downs. A few weeks ago, there was a dealership within driving distance that had, 54 minutes away, had a new bike like one I wanted. I found it on the site one night. I called it the next day. By 11 o'clock the next day, it had already been sold. They had it in stock all of 3 days. So, at this point, here's where we are. This Saturday, we are supposed to have moderate temperatures in the upper 70s, lower 80s. And there is a dealership about 2 hours south of us that has a bike like I want. So I am going to call them in the morning. And talk with them about price and putting down a deposit and coming this Saturday to pick it up, which will be, a lot of us drop into the car and drive south, visit beautiful Fort Campbell, and then buy a motorcycle and ride it the heck home. Fort Campbell. A friend of mine some years ago was commanding general of Fort Campbell. Went from a poor white trash kid to brigadier general in 20 years. It's a wonderful story of success, tenacity, and just really being a hard-working, good person. I really liked that guy. He was great. But at any rate, so we are now suiting up to go get a bike, and I will find out in the morning whether that happens or not. Further news, let's go back to the garden for a minute. For some reason, I don't know how this is happening or what's going on, but during the day we get serenaded by cicadas, lots and lots of cicadas. But at night, there is like tree frogs everywhere. I have never heard this many tree frogs. Well, I can't say never. It's been a long, long time since I've heard this many tree frogs going off all night long. It's like they're having a party and a convention all at the same time. It's loud enough sometimes that they are louder than the traffic on the 4-lane state highway that's about a quarter of a mile away. It's lots of them, and they're really loud. I tried to record it to share with you so you could hear, 9 million tree frogs yelling and screaming and throwing things at one another, but it just wouldn't record. I don't know why. I guess I just don't have good enough equipment for that. But you can imagine lots and lots of tree frogs. It may remind you of, living in southern Mississippi for a while. And that's been part of the ups and downs. I mentioned that it's been incredibly hot, but for the last couple of weeks, every 2 or 3 days, we have had bands of severe weather pass through. Earlier this week, we had a couple of bands come through. The local airport recorded peak sustained winds of 75 miles an hour. Now, these were straight line winds, not like a hurricane, but it was, nice to see trees getting bent over and nearly horizontal rain. It was fun until the power went out. Power went out for most of our county. There was over 90% of the people in the county were without power for several hours. Some were almost 24 hours before they had power restored. We were lucky because of our location, that we are near our area. Our subdivision is near several critical infrastructure features, so we were only without power for like about 9 hours. But I really felt for the workers who had to go out and try to fix all of this stuff, because it was lightning everywhere, high winds, heavy rains. It would have been a miserable night to be outside trying to do work on high power electrical equipment. But they did. They did a wonderful job of getting out and getting things done and getting things fixed and restoring power to people. Power to the people, y'all. Which leads to, I told you beginning, like last fall, we were in the situation of having to make major appliance purchases almost monthly. Dishwasher, refrigerator, microwave after microwave. And about 3 weeks ago, I said to the wife, it's amazing. We went through that period of having to make a major purchase, $5,000 a month, every month for months and months, and we've been like 2-3 months without having to do anything, and then everything collapsed. The daughter's computer brought up some problems with power and video and all this other stuff, and we had to spend a couple of $1,000s to get her back up. And then one day, we were out doing the groceries and the pharmacy visits and all of that when the car's air conditioner went toes up. So we took the car to the dealership, and the dealership started looking at it, and the tech got in there and he put the thing on the lift to see where the leak might be in the air conditioning, and found that power steering was leaking in 4 or 5 different places. I saw the parts. Yeah, they were bad off, leaking all sorts of nastiness. So it was several $1,000s to get the air conditioner fixed, because they had to pull the dash and get a whole bunch of parts. And then they had to get parts for the steering, the power steering rack, a front axle, CV joints and boots, and etc. So that was a couple of $1,000, and now that we've almost got that repaired, the wife's car has decided it wants to be difficult too. So we're back in our cycle of major purchases. It is life, ain't it? Ain't it fun? Ain't it grand? But it's getting better, especially in the political front. Let's take a visit. Let's go down the primrose path of history back to the medieval period in Europe. Up to that point, up to about the 16th century, not just in Europe, but everywhere in the world, the king, the emperor, was the law. They were the law. They gave the law. They instantiated the law. So in a sense, they were above the law. There was nothing they could do that was illegal, because they defined what was legal and what was illegal. But then along came this little bit of English history called the Magna Carta, in which the nobles forced King Charles to sign and commit to the nobility having rights that the king could not overturn, and in which document it states that the king is not above the law, that the king is very much a subject of the kingdom as anyone else, and is therefore subject to the law. Well, Charles was not too happy with this, and went through a period of ignoring the Magna Carta and stomping all over the nobility, and finally there was a bit of a civil war. Charles was arrested, and in 1649 had his head lifted from his shoulders, thus ending, for at least England, the divine right of kings. From 1649 we can say that no ruler is above the law. This was further emphasized later on in England. And then in France, a couple of centuries later, in the mid-18th century, King Louis, I forget whether it was the 14th or 15th, Louis got his head lifted. And thus the era of revolution. Here in the United States, when our founders read through John Locke's 2 treatises on government, they put it into law. The famous line from 1628, I believe it was, something like that. Thomas Hobbes in England during the English Civil War, at the end of which Charles got his head kicked off. Thomas Hobbes wrote a wonderful book called Leviathan. And he did something that was at the time very radical. In chapter 13, he starts in on the bases for governance. He opens that section with a line that continues to reverberate. Thomas Hobbes, the first person for the first time, writes, "All men are created equal," and that through their mutual diffidence one against the other, they establish a sovereign to rule over them, and they surrender some of their natural innate rights to that sovereign in order to provide peace, security, and the bases for a civil society. And this is known today as the social contract theory. Well, John Locke, in the beginning of the 18th century, took up Hobbes's ideas and brought them into a fuller, more modern set of ideas, starting with all men are created equal and the social contract theory, and states that everyone, by nature, innately, when you are born in a natural state in which you are completely free to do whatever you want to. And if you lived in the state of nature, out in the jungle, on your own with nobody else, you are free to do whatever the heck you want to. But by being born into a social setting, you, by sticking around, are silently agreeing to the social contract and agreeing to abide by the laws. And those who do not abide by the law are subject to detention, arrest, trial, and punishment for any wrongdoing that you do. As a matter of fact, Locke echoes Hobbes in saying that a crime against one is a crime against all. So anytime somebody breaks the law, they are harming everyone else in that society. If not directly, then indirectly. And so, the Constitution is written on the principle of egalitarianism, that we're all equal. We're all equally subject to the law. So that anyone and everyone, from the lowest to the meanest of us to the wealthiest and most powerful, are subject to the law. Now, as we have seen over the past 160 years, that has been corrupted, so that today there are basically several different justice or injustice systems here in the United States.
9 times out of 10.
The poor, especially if they are dark-skinned, are more severely punished for even minor crimes than those who are rich and powerful. You may not remember this, or you may not even know of this incident, but while we were in Mississippi at the same time, there was a tragic accident. There was one of our professors had a wonderful daughter who was in a sorority, and she was out with several of her sorority friends on the town, and they were having a good time, and they were driving back to the sorority house when they were front-ended by a much larger car going way over the speed limit. And the girl, who was daughter of one of our professors, ended up in a coma. And when she finally came out of the coma, She could not remember the previous 4 years of her life. She had gone back to the time when she was 16 and was unaware of all the other stuff that had happened. Now, the guy who caused this accident and grievously injured 5 young women happened to be, he was drunker than hell. He had multiple counts of DUI against him, that all of which had been dropped because he was the son of a local judge. He received no punishment for having injured these young ladies, either in criminal or civil trial. At the same time, on almost the same night, there was a young black man who went into a stop and rob that was near campus, picked up a 6-pack and forgot to pay for it on the way out. He was arrested, tried, and was sentenced to 5 years in the state penitentiary. It was his first crime, first time in a court, and he received much more severe punishment than this other person. That's anecdotal, of course, and it's just an example. You can call it cherry picking if you want, but no, it is an example of how things work in the American injustice system. Those who are poor suffer. Those who are rich can get away with murder, and they often do. Now we're faced with a former president who clearly, over the past several years, has committed many offenses against the people, against the government, against the United States, and violation of the Constitution on several counts. And it looks as though maybe, just maybe, he will be held accountable. He and some of those people around him. I'm hoping that even though our nation appears to be falling apart at the seams, that maybe, just maybe, we will have one instance where somebody of power, wealth, and influence will be held accountable. Let's hope he is. The thing that is amusing on that to me, that I find, gently amusing and chortling at the same time distressing, is that there are people who think that this is some kind of secret vendetta by the far left to get him somehow or other. And in that discussion that I've seen in social media in several formats, Twitter, Quora, several other places of open debate, there are those who say that former presidents and former presidents should not be held accountable for any crimes that they commit. They're echoing words from George W. Bush, from Bill Clinton, from Richard Nixon, the divine right of kings, that the president is the law, that the president is above the law and cannot be held accountable for any violations because the president, by definition, being the sovereign, is the law and thus above the law and thus cannot commit treason.
Oh, and you're hiding your
As
license.
we know, Nixon got away with it, Reagan got away with it, W got away with it. Let's hope, finally, that we have a criminal president be held accountable. Now, the problem here, let's go back. Divine right of kings. There are people who still believe that the correct order of society is divided. That rights, privileges, freedoms, as well as duties, obligations, and responsibilities are different for different people. If you are rich and powerful, you have one set of rights, one set of duties. But if you're poor, you have a different set. It's almost as though there are people who in our nation supposedly egalitarian. Remember, all men are created equal. We're supposed to be an egalitarian society, and yet those on the far right want to insist that those above a certain level are above the law. I find this fascinating in that it shows how poorly these people are educated, or how poorly they understand how civil society is constituted. It surprises me that there are so many Americans who want to go back to medieval Europe. They want to go back to the 13th century, when only the rich have any rights or freedoms, and the rest of us are just slaves to carry out their will, to do their jobs for them, to feed them, to clothe them, to build their houses, and do it all without rights and at the poorest wages imaginable, as though we're set on a course where there is a 2 or 3% at the very top who are ultra wealthy, who own everything and control everything, and the other 97 or 98% have nothing. Nothing at all. Not even rights. Not food, not money, not power, not even the abstraction of rights. And this is part of the reason why these people, in my estimation, are so utterly opposed to public education. Because if everyone is educated, well, you can have a look around. Look around the world at the societies with the highest literacy rates, with the highest quality of education, and those societies tend to be more liberal, more democratic, and tend to have a higher quality of life for everyone. And those in which the literacy rate is lowest, and in which the distribution of goods and wealth is unequal, where there's the handful of rich and the majority who are dirt poor, these tend to be totalitarian states, dictatorships. And that is what the American right wants. They want a totalitarian state that looks like a theocracy, that imprivileges a handful and enslaves the majority. Maybe, just maybe, if we can hold this one person accountable, we can start to right the ship and return to the state that was envisioned 200 and some odd years ago by our founders after reading Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Not James Locke, John Locke. If you haven't read 2 treatises on government, you should. If you haven't read chapter 13 of Leviathan, you should. These are the 2 major works on which our Constitution, the basic principles of our nation, were founded. We got lost somewhere along the way, and maybe now, close to the end of things, the ship may get righted. I don't know. I'm hoping. I hope that this guy and his running dog lackeys are held accountable. That they're given a fair trial, and then, whatever their punishment is that they deserve for the crimes they have committed. We will see. For now, we live in hope, but not in Hope, Arkansas. Yet we live with faith and hope. Hope for a future. If we lose hope, if we lose faith, then we have nothing. So, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. The President took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. If he didn't, he must be held accountable. We'll see. I will update you later, dear heart, when we have something on the motorcycle. And maybe that will be Saturday. Let's hope. The future may be bright. It may be shining. And who knows? We will see what happens. Lord help us all. See you later, kid. Bye-bye.